Projector lights, projector and screen.
Use a projector last time?
Hmm?
I don't remember using a projector last time.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this September 2nd, 2020 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. I now welcome board members and advisors, staff, visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. For our visitors and those listening online, our committee meetings and reports will span 2 days, and tomorrow's meeting will include voting on any items requiring action. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflict of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Buxton.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry to have logged in late. I'd like to be recorded as present. Also, if I could be recused from EICS 1, please.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Buxton has recused himself from EICS 1.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Treasurer Falwell. I'm also logged in until my next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer. The board extends our thanks to the Governor, General Assembly, and philanthropic partners for their support of funding of initiatives to meet the needs of our public school students, teachers, and staff since their return to school. What we continue to see clearly through this process is that it takes partnership, both at the state and federal levels, to close the needed funding gaps that are present this year. As always, our goal is the health and safety first to ultimately return students to in-person instruction during the 2020-21 school year. Since our schools reflect the health and safety of our communities, the number one thing that we can all do to support our students and teachers is to commit ourselves to pound this virus out by practicing the 3 W's: washing our hands, waiting 6 feet, and wearing our mask. We appreciate your support in this endeavor. This is typically the month we receive an overview of accountability results for the prior year. Given that we were granted a waiver from accountability requirements last school year, no report will be provided outside of the cohort graduation rate for the 2019-20 school year, which was not waived. Board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week and had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda, and if not, I request a motion for approval of the agenda. Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Dr. Oxendine.
That was, I think, Dr. Tipton Rogers.
Oh, excuse me. Second by Dr. Tipton Rogers. Thank you. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton? Mr. Buxton? Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall, Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. We have an agenda. Thank you. We'll now proceed to today's committee reports, and I note to many chairs and audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be completed tomorrow via roll call vote. I'll now recognize Ms. White, Chair of the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee. Ms. White.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy White. I'm the Chair of the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee. I share that responsibility with Ms. Jill Kamnitz. We have a short agenda for our committee this month. First, I'd like to begin with our new business item. This is an update on the NC Access Grant. Really excited for Mr. Jay Whalen, the program administrator for the Access Program, and Mr. Machado to update you on where we are with equity practices. The NC Access Program held a large meeting last week, of which I was privileged to bring welcoming comments on behalf of the board. The Access Program awards competitive grants to charter schools who demonstrate a commitment and a comprehensive plan for removing barriers and increasing enrollment to our educationally disadvantaged students. Here today to talk to us about this is Mr. Jay Whalen.
Thank you, Ms. White, and good morning, members of the board. We're always super excited for the privilege to be in front of you and discuss the Access Program and talk about some of the amazing things that our schools are doing. I'd like to give a brief update about where the program is moving into the second cohort of subgrantees that you awarded last month, and then give a little overview of some of the equitable practices that are being implemented by schools. And then what I'm really excited about is we have 3 school leaders from 2 of our subgrantees from cohort 1 here to speak to you about some of the ways that they're using access funding and some of the development that we've offered to increase equity and equitable practices in their own. So as you all know, the NC Access Program is made possible by a $36.6 million federal CSP grant. We were initially awarded in 2018 as one of 8 states in the country with a $26.6 million grant, and then awarded a supplemental grant in 2019 based on some of the successes we had in year 1 and our ability to expand the reach of the program. So currently our plan over 5 years is to award subgrants to 60 excellent schools throughout North Carolina who present a comprehensive plan to decrease barriers and increase support for educationally disadvantaged students throughout the state, as well as support 160 transformational leaders through our Access Fellowship Program and use the best practices and strategies developed within our schools and within that program to collaborate with traditional public schools, other charter schools around the state, and share best practices more widely. So very quickly to kind of give you an idea of where we are as a program, just about 2 years into this, the visual on the screen helps you kind of break down how that $36.6 million is allocated. The vast majority, over 90% of the funds, goes directly to schools in the forms of subgrants. So over the course of 5 years, we'll award $33.1 million to eligible charter schools throughout North Carolina to help them meet the needs of educationally disadvantaged students and increase the populations of those students within their schools. About 8% of that 36 million is allocated for technical assistance, which a large part of that is our fellowship program, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute, but then some other professional development and resource opportunities that we're able to provide for schools as well. And then the remaining 2% is the administrative cost to not only implement the program, but also to bring on a program evaluator to research and evaluate the efficacy of the program as well. So currently through 2 years, we have awarded 42 subgrants. So an update for this board, at your August meeting, you approved awards for 34 charter schools totaling $17.4 million. One of those schools, Brevard Academy, has declined their award for any number of reasons related to COVID and some of the obstacles that they're dealing with this year. They just decided that this was not the best year to implement. So they have decided to decline the award. So the official total from August is now 33 schools and $16.8 million. And through years 1 and 2, 42 schools and $20.2 million. So over the course of the next 3 years, there are 18 available subgrants left of our 60. And currently we have about 100 current and past fellows completing the Access Fellowship. And so just a quick update on the subgrantees themselves and the reopening plans. This is a breakdown of how our 42 subgrantees are opening or reopening their schools this year, I should say. About 36% are opening with a hybrid of in-person and virtual model, where students are coming into the building either in smaller groups or certain days out of the week. Most of those are pretty limited in-person offerings. And 45% are opening remote only, with 19% of our schools in the planning year, so they are not opening this year. And then if we take the planning year schools out, we have about 56% of our schools that are operating remote on Plan C only, and 44% that have some combination of in-person and virtual learning. And Mr. Machado can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that tracks fairly closely with the larger charter school community, but I believe the Plan B group is a bit larger for the rest of the charter schools in North Carolina. So I'd like to take a minute to talk through some of the major components of our program before we turn it over to the schools and talk about how the NC Access program itself is addressing equity. And so the first major piece is the subgrant program. Again, that's where 90% of our funding goes, and that's where the majority of our support, particularly financial support, goes to schools directly. So with the subgrant program, as I mentioned, to date, we've awarded 42 of the 60 subgrants that we will award over the course of 5 years. And a lot of these requirements of the program are being implemented currently by past and current subgrantees. So the Access program requires certain things to be part of a plan to increase the populations of educationally disadvantaged students and remove barriers for those students. So the first is that all subgrantees are required to have approved weighted lotteries. You've obviously seen a lot of those come before you for approval in the last couple of years, and we'll continue to see those come before you. But all of our schools are required to have an approved weighted lottery and implement that in order to use that as a tool in conjunction with their marketing and recruitment plan to ensure a significant increase in the amount of educationally disadvantaged students that they serve. And I'll just remind this board that the definition we use for educationally disadvantaged is the federal definition, which includes students who are economically disadvantaged, English learners, students with disabilities, homeless or unaccompanied youth, immigrant students, and migrant students. All schools that receive subgrants must also provide a transportation plan. And so we've, over the past week and for the next couple of weeks, we're completing planning calls with all of our newly approved subgrantees. But a vast majority of subgrantees in the program are using access funds to build up transportation programs, particularly buying buses and increasing the capacity that they have to transport students to and from school. All schools must provide comprehensive lunch plans. While CSP funds cannot be used to pay for meals or kitchen equipment, it is a requirement of the program that lunch is provided and available for students who would qualify. We do have a number of schools that, as a result of being in this program, are joining the National School Lunch Program as well. And then all schools must implement a parent and community advisory council that is representative of the student population and is particularly formed to have a direct line of communication with the school administration or the board of directors to address any needs and provide advocacy and advice from the parent and community perspective. And so outside of the specific requirements of the program, I just wanted to highlight a couple things that our subgrantees are doing. We see a lot of these across the board, but these are just some of the things that we pulled out to highlight. We've seen a number of bilingual community liaisons. So when we talk about marketing and recruitment and serving particularly English learners and students who are not native English speakers, we've seen a number of schools use access funds to contract with a bilingual community liaison, someone who is not only sort of deeply entrenched and a member of the community and knows the community well, but is also a bilingual speaker and can communicate with families. We've seen a number of schools implement trauma-informed discipline and school climate practices. One of our fellowship sessions from last year centered around trauma-informed approaches to schools and how to address adverse childhood experiences. And we've seen a number of sub-grantees implement some of those strategies within their schools. Particularly one school is implementing a mindfulness program as sort of an alternative to your traditional discipline program. A lot of our schools are investing heavily in professional development around equity, particularly racial equity training. So we've seen the Racial Equity Institute use the Educational Equity Institute, the We Are organization, and some other organizations and speakers out of UNC Charlotte and some other organizations. But that has been a big emphasis. Professional development itself is a very big emphasis for schools, particularly around working with students in poverty, working with students experiencing homelessness. But the racial equity training for entire charter school staffs has been something that we've been very pleased that schools are investing in. Tutoring and enhanced educational opportunities to provide additional academic supports for educationally disadvantaged students and all students generally, and then meeting the technology needs for all students. This was a priority for all of our schools in year one, but has particularly become an acute priority for sub-grantees that were awarded in August for year two, and the schools that are continuing on from year one. You know, every school is in a situation where remote learning is if not the entire program, a large chunk of the program right now. So being able to meet the technology needs, particularly for students who don't otherwise have those means at home, has been very important and a very key part of where the Access program can have some impact on schools' operations. And as I mentioned earlier, the Access Fellowship is something that we're probably most excited about. It's our year-long development program for 160 leaders throughout the state. So for schools that are awarded subgrants, 2 leaders from each school attend the fellowship. That would account for 120 of our 160 over 5 years. And then we're also inviting 40 leaders from schools that are not eligible for NC Access subgrants to join over the 5 years as well. And so our hope is that after 5 years, we have a cohort of 160 leaders that have been through this immersive and intensive professional development year that are taking those best practices and equitable strategies back to their schools. So the fellowship is very focused on equity and leadership and removing barriers for educationally disadvantaged students. What you'll see on the screen is just some of the groups and organizations that we've been privileged to work with over the past 2 years and are really excited about the focus for this year and what this fellowship is going to mean for leadership development throughout North Carolina. And again, I want to thank Ms. White for her comments and being able to attend our kickoff last month. And we'd be thrilled to have any board members join any of those sessions throughout the year as well. And so one program that we're going to start launching, and this is sort of the first introduction to it to this board, but to also many people, it's very new, born out of a conversation over the summer at the Charter School Advisory Board about increasing our leaders of color within charter schools. We are launching the Aspiring Minority Charter School Leaders Program. And so what that will mean is using some of our technical assistance funding and support that we're able to provide. We're partnering with Appalachian State University to create a charter school leaders of color pipeline. So 10 leaders per year will be nominated, and it will be a competitive application process, but we will select 10 leaders per year, assistant principals, other deans and leaders of color in charter schools that are in line to become school leaders themselves. At some point, we'll go through a fellowship style experience with us, so sort of a year-long professional development around equity and removing barriers similar to our fellowship right now, as well as complete coursework with Appalachian State that will result in a North Carolina school administrator license, with the hope that we begin to build a pipeline of school leaders of color that can open or launch high-quality charter schools or be ready to take over either current or existing schools that they're at or other schools that are searching for a leader throughout the state. So much more to come about this program, but we did just want to kind of notify you briefly about this program that's in the works and that we're trying to launch later this spring. And then finally, the dissemination and collaboration piece is our other third big goal of the program. So we're currently developing a website to share best practices. Our hope is to launch that early this fall. But all of our fellows create a portfolio of best practices and strategies that they're implementing in their schools to support educationally disadvantaged students. And we're working with an organization that is helping us curate those and get them into replicable formats. So other charter schools, other traditional public schools, educators from around the state or even the country could go to this website, pull best practices, look up things that they could implement in their schools and find strategies that are easily replicable and able to be implemented to support all students. So we're currently in the process of developing and curating the first round of portfolio entries from cohort 1 that will be uploaded to that website, but this will be an ongoing process that will continue to add best practices and strategies to that website for the coming years. And then fellows are also required to host collaborative events at their school, so bringing schools to not only to see what's on our website, but in person to see what's happening at schools themselves, see the practices in person and in action, and we're exploring other ways to collaborate with local LEAs and charter schools and sort of bridge that district charter collaboration piece. We do have some current subgrantees that have already sort of on their own led collaborative meetings with the local districts where they reside and had some planning and strategy meetings about how they can work together to support all students throughout the district. So that's really promising, and we hope to build on some of that as well. So that was very quickly kind of what we're doing as a program. I'm very excited to turn it over to our school leaders now. I think that's one of the most exciting pieces of this is to hear what's actually happening in the schools. And so we'll have time for questions generally at the end, but right now I'm excited to turn it over to 2 schools that we had in cohort 1, Invest Collegiate Imagine in Asheville, North Carolina, and the Explorer School in Raleigh, North Carolina, to talk a little bit about how they're addressing equity and how the Access Grant has supported their work to support all students, but particularly educationally disadvantaged students. So first, I'd like to turn it over to Jen Townley and Ellen Girardi from Invest Collegiate Imagine.
Good morning, Jay. Thank you so much. And also members of the board, we really are honored to have the opportunity to be a recipient of this grant and to be here today to share our initial successes with you. The first thing that we want to share is that we implemented our weighted lottery. And we held our first lottery this spring, and we did fill all of our slots, and we had a really huge response to it. So we were able to, of the available spots we had, reach the 30% mark of educationally disadvantaged students. And it was really sort of amazing, the response. We did go out into the community quite a bit this spring and winter to share this opportunity and plan to do more. And we think the marketing piece of a weighted lottery is a really vital piece of it being successful. We just want to make sure everyone in our community knows that we have opportunities available for them. So the weighted lottery is the first piece of structural changes that we implemented as a result of this grant. Our second piece, Jay, you're running the slides, I think you want to slide us down, is our transportation plan. We currently own 2 buses and are in the process of purchasing 6 additional buses. COVID-19 slowed us down a bit, but has not stopped us in implementing our transportation plan. We are purchasing the buses now so that we are prepared as students fully return to the building to be offering 6 community bus stops. And the transportation of all of the things is the most key in making sure as a charter school that we really are accessible to educationally disadvantaged students, in our opinion. It is really, really hard to achieve as a charter school without that funding in place. And so receiving this grant has been vital to our ability to be able to provide the transportation in our community. And it's been a really important piece and question as we were out in the community talking about our weighted lottery as well. So, and then third step for us in year one was implementing a school-based health center. So as we took this grant on, and equity in our school was important to us, and this work was at play before we received the grant. But one thing that we know about schools and equity is that everyone that goes to our school needs to feel welcome and safe as they come in our building, and that all of the wraparound services that we can provide as a school that are community-based really, really help with that. So the school-based health center partnership actually didn't cost us any money, but it was just a big piece of the puzzle for us. So we have that health center operating inside of our school. The health center provides health care to any family that attends our school that registers. So that means not just our students, but our students' siblings, if they have younger siblings, their parents, as well as our staff. So we have a nurse in the building all day, every day. We have a physician's assistant on campus 3 days a week. We also have mental health 3 days a week. I think this says 2 days a week, but we upped it to 3 because of demand. We actually pulled the numbers for our portfolio, and we have about 1,235 students, and of those 1,230 students, we had over 50% register and use the school-based health center in year one, along with about 70% of our staff doing so. And they are able to provide more than just a nurse's care. They do everything, all medical care, and including being the primary medical care. So an example of what might happen in our school is a child might tell their teacher that they have a sore throat, and they'll go to the school-based health center and they'll see the nurse, and the nurse is able to assess them, run a strep test, call mom and dad, let them know that's happened, call in a prescription for them so they can pick it up, and say, hey, do you have other children in your home? If you want to come in when you pick up your child, we can take a look at them and get all of your health care taken care of here in this 15 minutes, which is a very different feeling than being a school that just calls home and says, Cindy doesn't feel good, and we need you to come pick them up, and without really being able to provide that really, really big piece that's really hard on some families. So the school-based health center for us, structurally addressing equity, has been a big way for our families to come into our school building, access a different kind of service, and start to feel really comfortable and welcome in our building.
All right. Good morning, everyone. So Jen just talked to you a little bit about structural changes that we made to address equity, and I'm going to speak to kind of supportive or the kind of underlying changes that we've made to both support our teachers and our students, as well as our whole community. So as a school, as Jay noted earlier, one of the main things that we're spending this money on is professional development, and we have kind of 2 tracks going at once to support professional development. So the first one is something that's going on in schools all the time, but this idea that teachers need ongoing professional development that's high quality and helps them to become better educators and make sure that they're meeting the needs of all children. So as a school, our mission is that all kids are learning at high levels. And so we are committed to continuing to provide that level of training for our teachers. And then at the same time, because we have made this choice to address equity, we also know that this work is very difficult for people, especially teachers that are going to be implementing culturally responsive practices in their classrooms. And so we are working with the Racial Equity Institute to do this line of training that is really this ongoing transformation for our staff. It really takes a lot of self-work and kind of digging into yourself and working on becoming an anti-racist yourself before you can really implement these practices in your classroom. So that's the other track that's going on, and it's kind of ongoing for us. As noted, COVID-19 has definitely slowed us down, but as Jen said, it has not stopped us. So we're definitely still moving forward with that. But The training has moved to virtual, which means smaller cohorts. So we've had to push our timeline out slightly. The second way we are supporting our teachers and our students is by providing access to technology. Last year, before we knew the pandemic was coming, we made the choice to go one-to-one in grades 3 through 12. And that was entirely, that was an opportunity that was provided to us by this grant. And it definitely increased the educational opportunities that were happening in our school for all kids. But then in March, when the pandemic was upon us, we were able to send our children in grades 3 through 12 home with their Chromebooks, which definitely made a huge difference for us when we were kind of faced with this new challenge. And then the additional thing we were able to do this year, as starting school, we knew this year was going to be much different. So we were able to go ahead and provide iPads for our grades K1 students, and then also provide some additional Chromebooks because our enrollment has continued to get larger. And so now we are fully one-to-one K-12. We were able to make sure that every child had a device in their hand that was school-owned going into remote learning this fall. And from an equity standpoint, being able to know that every kid has the same device so that we can provide problem solving and troubleshooting, and our teachers can put their hands on a device exactly like the device their children are using so that they can practice whatever it is they're going to teach the fifth graders to do, or make a video showing exactly how it looks on their screen, it's been a huge difference for us as far as from the spring to now, especially in those younger grades. We also have hotspots that we're able to provide to any family that needs them. Again, just trying to make sure that we're removing any barrier that's in someone's way so that all kids are getting a similar and an equitable experience from school. And then our third way that we've made a kind of supportive change is by partnering with another local nonprofit. And this nonprofit is called the Colorful Pages Coalition. They're based here in Asheville, and their goal is to diversify bookshelves. And so what that means is they focus on getting books by people of color, illustrated by people of color, onto books, featuring children of color, onto bookshelves in area classrooms. And so we've partnered with them. We started with kindergarten and first grade classrooms. It was one thing the pandemic didn't stop. But we are hoping to do second and third grade classrooms, and then fourth and fifth grade classrooms once we return and are back to school in person. The other really awesome thing they provide is a training that is supportive of families and teachers. So it's an opportunity to get teachers and families in a room together and attend a professional development or a training all at once. And so the kindergarten and first grade teachers are hearing the same information that the kindergarten and first grade families are hearing. All about how it's called the Power of the Picture Book, and it's all about how to use these powerful books as teaching tools and to have meaningful conversations about diversity and race. And it's just another opportunity for children of color to see themselves represented positively in books. So we were really excited to partner with them. And that is the end of our spotlight. I think Amanda is next from Explore Us.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Amanda. I'm the Associate Director of the Explorer School. We're in downtown Raleigh, and we have been around since 1996. So we were in one of the first groups of charter schools to be approved by the state, and we are doing really well. We were excited about the Access Grant because it allowed us to join the expansion sub-grant and expand the percentage and number of educationally disadvantaged students we were serving. We took a look at our student body and compared that to that of Wake County and discovered that we were not in alignment with Wake County regarding the number of educationally disadvantaged students we were serving. And we feel strongly that, that we should be in alignment with Wake County and Wake County Public Schools. So let's go, Jay. Awesome. So we actually did our first weighted lottery in the spring of last year, and we have increased from 10% of students qualifying for free and reduced lunch to 18%. So we were targeting 15% and we ended up at 18, which so we're super excited to have that level of growth. We're implementing sort of a staggered implementation that will allow us to increase year over year. So our goal to match Wake County is to get to 25%. In addition to increasing there, we're really excited. The Access Grant allowed us to triple our ability to provide free meals for students. And so we were able to provide free meals to 3 times more students, and that included over the pandemic. We were able to feed families as well, in addition to individual students. Because of that, we were able to also continue food support over the summer. So that was a big success for us this year. Just as Jen and Ellen mentioned, professional development is a huge part of the work we're doing at the Explorer School as we expand our student body of educationally disadvantaged students. So you can see a list there of some of the things we've been doing. Just like them, we've been working with the Racial Equity Institute on groundwater training and other approaches to culturally responsive teaching. We also have been working on our school culture, knowing that about the data and the research that says that children of color, and particularly boys of color, often are disciplined differently than their peers. And so we've been really looking at training our staff around restorative practices, restorative justice practices, and looking at how we can use discipline as growth and responsibility rather than as punishment. And so that entire school-wide approach to enhance our school culture in a way that supports the growth of every student rather than perpetuates the sorts of biases that can emerge in schools. You'll also see trauma-informed teaching listed there. We were already working toward that, and with the support of the Access folks and the Access Fellowship led by Jay, we had some great training around adverse childhood experiences and trauma-informed teaching. And we've brought that back to our staff, and it's been really sort of prescient because in the time of a pandemic, every person's experiencing trauma. Every kid in our buildings experienced trauma. Every teacher in our building has experienced trauma, and every family has experienced trauma. And so now we are really focusing on how does that experience of trauma need to impact the way we interact and the way we learn. So that's been will continue to be a school-wide focus as we move forward. Awesome. Similarly to, as Ellen was saying, we also have been able to purchase student devices. So we are approaching one-to-one access to Chromebooks. That is a goal of ours. We're not quite there yet, but we're approaching that after year 1. We have distributed 150 devices to our students. For context, we have about 400 students. So that's over a quarter of our families have received a free device from us as needed for virtual learning. We also were able to give all staff members new laptops as a result of our Access Grant funding, which is really important to allow those teachers to be able to have consistent access to their students during virtual learning. So we were able to provide that. Much the way Ellen and Jen talked about providing things for classrooms, so they discussed providing access to books. We partnered with NC Teach. If you're not familiar with them, they specialize in working with children with autism. And they came out to our school and looked at our classrooms and looked at our building and gave us some feedback on how we might rearrange our classroom furniture and what we might do to make our classrooms more accessible to students with autism. And so we were able to, using funds from the Access Grant, purchase additional furniture and completely redesign our classrooms to help better meet the needs of those students. When a classroom is designed to meet the needs of autistic students, it actually benefits every student, right? Because those are classroom designs that then limit sensory input. They help create certain types of spaces that help students feel safe at school. So it's really important to design from that perspective. And then one final piece around instructional materials I've listed there is at our school, one of our core values is connections to nature. And we believe strongly in getting outside the building being in nature, being outdoors, even though we're a downtown Raleigh school. So we were able to start establishing an outdoor classroom at our elementary campus using funds from the grant. And then finally, just as they highlighted a partnership with Colorful Pages, we partnered with a fantastic organization out of Durham called Peaceful Schools North Carolina. And Peaceful Schools North Carolina focuses on restorative practices, school culture, positive climate, and worked with us on those discipline pieces around how do we help teachers and students have a positive, supportive, safe climate rather than one of discipline and fear. And so they provided for us a staff retreat, professional development, and we're most excited about a mentoring program that we're implemented with their support. So at our school now, every kindergartner has a 5th grade mentor, and every 6th grader has an 8th grade mentor. And so those 5th graders and kindergartners partner throughout the year, as well as the 6th graders and 8th graders, and do activities together, connect with one another. For instance, at a school event recently, I had a kindergartner sobbing and scared to participate in a kindergarten performance. And I said to her, "Who's your 5th grade mentor?" And she indicated the name of a student. I went over to that 5th grade student and said, "Hey, your mentee is having a really hard time." And she went over, put her arm around her mentee and helped her settle down and helped her get back into participating with her peers. So that sort of school culture experience has been really powerful for us to bring students together and support leadership of our older students in that way as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank Ellen, Jen, and Amanda for their time this morning. As I mentioned earlier, these are the types of best practices that we hope to share more broadly, post on our website, have collaborative events, and get people into schools to be able to see these and replicate some of these amazing things, as well as what our other sub-grantees are doing, because there's a lot more than just what we presented today. But at this time, I'll turn it back over to Ms. White and ask for questions from the board. Anything that you'd like to learn more about, or questions that you have for either myself or more specifically Jen, Ellen, and Amanda.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen. Thank you so much to our 2 schools who presented this morning. I am sure that I have questions from fellow board members. I'll open it to anyone who might like to ask a question or dive further into what the schools have done to begin this journey of including more educationally disadvantaged students in their populations.
Ms. White, I have a question, a comment, if I may.
Sure, Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Ms. White. First of all, I want to say, I've probably said this before. I'll say it again, if I might. I've listened to many presentations coming before the State Board of Education, and many times I had to stand up and race around the room. I was so excited. And this is one of those times. I mean, I love this Colorful Pages Coalition and would love to enroll in the school so I could take part in some of the reading sessions. So this is very exciting work. I do have some questions. I won't call them reservations, I'll call them questions. The restorative practices theory and the training that you're doing around that, and I must admit, I need to do a bit more research on restorative practices myself, as it seems to be a response to student behavior in our classrooms. Is it grounded in any psychology of human behavior? For instance, is it built on the researcher that comes to mind? I'm dating myself again. Is the work of Lawrence Kohlberg and the moral development of children? I need to know more about restorative justice practices. If you could give me a thumbnail of what goes on in a workshop.
Yeah, so for instance, we begin a workshop by looking at those theories and around the research in particular around shame and what shame indicates, how it impacts a child. how it impacts a relationship, different types of shame. We look at different affective responses and progression of affective responses to a situation that emerges. So those are some of the theories that we look at, as well as behavioral theory, such as what emerges from some attachment theory and so on, where we know that behavior indicates that the behaviors always are communicating something. And the question is often, what is this behavior communicating, rather than what was the behavior itself? And so we work toward understanding some of that theory. And a restorative practices situation, when a student is engaging in a behavior that is impacting a relationship in some way, so perhaps they have said something unkind to a peer, what we do then is facilitate, as the adult, we facilitate conversation with each individual that was impacted. So tell me what happened. Tell me how that happened. How did it make you feel? How are you feeling now? Individually, and then we bring the parties together if they're willing and work through it together, working to heal that relationship and see behavior as a learning opportunity rather than simply saying, and now you've got silent lunch and we put you in the corner, right? So that's the sort of work that we do with restorative practices.
All right, yeah, very, very good. That helps somewhat. I'm going to commit myself to studying it more, because my concern is that whatever we do in our schools, especially in the area of discipline and behavior, that it is firmly rooted in some theoretical framework that's been tested and researched and proven over time.
Absolutely.
And I'm not drawing any conclusions about restorative justice practices. My final point is this, and I suppose this would go back to Jeff. I would be interested in using the teacher working condition survey very intentionally in these projects to see to measure, to analyze and measure the impact of this grant, wonderful opportunity to address equity, but to look at the impact on the on school climate, and that may be already built into the grant. I'm very interested in that line of research.
We can look into that for sure.
And those are my questions, Ms. White.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Questions from anyone else?
Mrs. White,
Yes.
Wendell Hall.
Yes, Mr. Hall.
Thank you. I have a question concerning or seeking additional information concerning the collaboration with Appalachian State and the training of future minority leaders within the charter schools. And I guess my question is, I know it's just in its formative stages. When I came on, that's where you were. Is it the applicant, will they get any financial assistance during this time? Will they be removed from the classroom for the curriculum side of it? Do you have that worked out yet? Anything you can add to that?
So the partnership with Appalachian State is completely virtual. So I believe it's 24 credit hours that eligible applicants who have a master's degree and meet all the requirements for Appalachian State will be eligible to participate in this program after they're accepted through our process. The NC Access program will cover the tuition costs. The only additional cost would be books or supplies that go along with the program. But the NC Access program has committed to covering the tuition costs for those students in the partnership with Appalachian State.
So it's totally online?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hall. Questions from additional colleagues? I believe Dave Machado would like to bring some additional information.
Thank you, Ms. White. I feel like a very proud father listening to these presentations, and I cannot give enough credit to our NC Access team, Mr. Whalen, Dr. O'Neill, and the two other people that just came on board. I feel like this grant has moved the needle more than anything else that has happened in the charter school world in the 23 or 4 years that we've been in existence. Through this presentation, you saw charter flexibility, you saw innovation, you saw sharing of best practices, and you saw an intentional effort to lower barriers in our high-quality charter schools. Could not be prouder. We've also been highlighted, North Carolina has been highlighted by the U.S. Department of Ed for this fellowship program. I have said multiple times that this is the best kept secret in North Carolina, and we're going to do something about it. And through these type presentations, we feel like we are getting the word out. In the new leaders pipeline, it's just an example of the NC Access team and the Office of Charter School brainstorming on how can we be the most effective change agent in a need that we have in North Carolina. So again, thank you to the two schools that presented. Thank you for State Board. I just wish we could have done this face to face so we all could have seen each other's excitement as they were going through. Two schools, this is just an example of the great things that are going on across the state. So thank you for giving me that opportunity to speak, Ms. White.
Thank you, Mr. Machado, for your amazing leadership. And while not the proud father, I am a proud board member for watching this unfold during the opportunity that I've had to serve on this committee, and fully support the opportunity that inclusive seats in charter schools who have for many years been widely placed in a position where they were, I'm going to use the word, not offering every seat to every student who needed an opportunity to have equity in the classroom. So I count this as a success.
Ms. White, if I may, very quickly.
Yes, please. I couldn't catch your voice.
It's Mr. Ford. I just wanted to make a comment and say to representatives from Invest Collegiate and Explorers, I truly want to commend you for the work that you're doing, particularly the focus on professional development, which we know is often an area that's lacking for teachers for one reason or another. But the pieces that you all identified around being trauma informed, focus on culturally responsive teaching practices, both organizations engaging in racial equity conversations, and even just focus of diverse representation in textbooks, restorative practices. Like, these things are really, I think, exemplify both the letter and the spirit of where we're attempting to go as a board in our strategic planning and our framework. And so it's just very encouraging to see these things being exemplified as part of NC Access as examples, but even as part of your fellowship, these things are embedded. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that. I'd be remiss if I didn't say I do think the student bodies could be a bit more diverse, but it does appear that with the weighted student lottery, that's something you're working towards. But these are precisely the sort of conversations and professional learning opportunities for teachers that need to be offered. And so I just wanted to take a moment to commend them.
Ms. White, if I could just add to what Mr. Ford just said quickly.
Yeah, yes, is that Ms. Kamnitz?
This incredibly wise and strategic use of these resources that you've been given to do this work is just really exciting. And as Mr. Ford said, it ties in directly with our strategic plan and also with the work that's been outlined in the Leandro case. We know that with these kinds of resources, we can have these kinds of impact with the children who need us most. So it's just really encouraging to see what you all are doing.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. Questions from any other, Vice Chair Duncan?
Thank you, Ms. White. First of all, thank you for the presentations to both schools, and in particular, more importantly, thank you for the work that you're doing with the students in those schools. I wanted to learn a little bit more about the transportation plans. I heard from Invest Collegiate, I think what I heard was 6 community stops, that there will be 6 buses. Wanted to understand, you know, exactly how that works? Is there one central location where the buses go to pick up the students? And from Explorer School, I'm not sure I heard what the transportation plan was, but I'm interested in what that would be also, since they're two different parts of our state, and it'd be good to get an understanding of how that's being approached.
So this is Ms. Townley from Invest Collegiate Imagine. So you heard correctly when we said that we were going to begin with community stops, and that works. For us, we surveyed all of our stakeholders that we serve and identified our highest need areas, and we have are working on developing MOAs with various businesses in those specific areas, so that we're able to bring buses there, and the parents can all meet in that area that's very embedded in their community. The thing about being a charter school is we draw students from all over our county. We actually draw students from 8 school systems particularly. And so we felt like that was the best way that we could begin to implement stops. We committed ourselves in the background because we know our families really well, and being a charter school, we have the benefit of that a larger system doesn't necessarily get, to be able to do a door-to-door stop for a family that's going to need it, and then provide the community stops as our general practice. And then over time, ultimately, possibly move into a space where we're able to do more door-to-door stops. Does that help clarify our plan?
Thank you.
Okay.
From Explorers' perspective, our initial plan in the beginning of year 1 was to purchase and use some 15 passenger vans as a way to, in part because we're in downtown Raleigh, so storage, parking of all of these, there are logistical issues around how we make that happen. So we learned later from the Department of Public Instruction that those did not meet safety requirements. And so we've had to pivot a bit in our transportation plan. Luckily, we have a lot of smart people working on it, and are in the process of figuring out how to provide, whether through buses or minibuses or whatever the case may be. In the meantime, our school has a partnership with the City of Raleigh bus system, the public bus system, and so a number of our students use public transportation to arrive at school. And so we help connect our families with the best way to make that happen. As Jen said, we also, since we are a small charter school, we also know our families really well. And so we have a really comprehensive carpool program where we help connect families who live near one another. And so any family that has trouble accessing school, we work really closely with our other families to connect them. And they then carpool with one another. And so that has actually been the best way we have found thus far to help students get to school. So for instance, as Jen said, we also draw students from 6 different counties. And so when we can find, say, somebody else who lives in Durham and drives into downtown Raleigh, then we are able to connect the families that way. And that seems to help an awful lot. We also have boosted our walk zone presence. So we have been targeting our marketing and recruitment efforts in the walk zone of our school. So that way we're able to let families know that we're there and we would like them to be a part of our community, allowing them to walk.
Thank you, Amanda. Any other questions? Thank you so much to my school leaders who took time out of your very busy schedules to join us this morning. Very much appreciate all that you're doing to serve all of the students who attend your school during this unprecedented time of remote learning. Actually, let me ask that question while I have you. To Amanda, are you remote learning only?
Yes, we are in Plan C, remote learning only. We're committed to that through the end of our first trimester, and then we'll reevaluate based on the local numbers as we go.
And then to Ellen and Jen, what are you guys doing?
So we started school in Plan C with a commitment to phase in students beginning with our most at-risk students. And so we actually on September 8th, which is next Wednesday, will welcome our first group of students into our building with some very we have a very collaborative staff that's coming on board. I think we have 9 teachers who are coming back to in-person instruction, really with our most vulnerable students. And we feel ready to implement all the safety practices with a small number of students and expect to have great success and phase more students in. We committed to a sort of a 4-week evaluation. So we'll have this first group in for 4 weeks. And if all is going well and we're feeling successful, then we will phase in our next group of students for in-person instruction.
Well, we pray for and wish for every success for you as you move to that blended approach.
Miss
thank
White,
you again for your
Miss
time.
White,
Yes.
Miss White, Miss White.
Yes, Dr. Oxendine.
This will take 15 seconds. You can begin counting. I love the school health center idea. Absolutely. Just amazed by that. Please, to Jay, at some time later versus sooner, sooner versus later, please tell us more about how the operations of a comprehensive school health center. I want to know a lot about that. That's critical. Thank you, Amy. Miss White.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. With no further questions, we'll move on to our next agenda on our item, and that is, oh my goodness, our first action item. It's EICS 1. This is PAVE Raleigh's request to separate from its education management organization, its EMO. Board members, you heard about this item and the reason for that request to separate last month. I do have Mr. Machado available to answer any questions should you have any. Are there any questions about PAVE Raleigh's request to separate from its EMO at this time? Okay, I don't see any. That'll be before us for a vote tomorrow. EICS 2 is Telra Institute's request to increase its enrollment and to actually defer grade 4 enrollment in year 1. So they're going to start with K3 and small increments of growth. You also heard a very detailed explanation of this institute's request to manipulate its initial population. Are there any questions from board members about this particular request from Telra Institute? Okay, I don't see any there. We'll move to just mentioning briefly the consent item, which is EICS 3. This is the 2019 Charter School Performance Framework report. We did have a robust discussion about this particular report and some of the data included in that report and the responsiveness of the Office of Charter Schools to questions from individual board members was held both through in-person dialogue and questions submitted by email. Does anyone have a question on the consent item today? I don't see any. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes the Education, Innovation, and Charter School report for this month.
Thank you, Ms. White, and I'd like to add my own commendation to the Office of Charter Schools and to your committee for this work on equity through the North Carolina Access Program, which is entirely in line with the board strategic plan and our own focus on equity. So thank you for that good work. We'll now turn to the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, chaired by Ms. Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis, and thank you, Ms. White, for an on-time handoff. I'll try to do the same. I share the responsibility for the work of the SLA committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Today we start with a new business item, an accountability update on testing in 2020-21. Dr. Howard is going to walk us through this. There are 2 parts to her presentation. The first one, provides a brief follow-up to our discussion last month on the optional use of last year's EOGs, which we're now calling special edition tests, so for clarity. The second one outlines the impact of COVID-19 on test development for the 2021 school year. Dr. Howard?
Thank you, Ms. Chemnitz, and good morning to everyone. So with that in mind, and thank you for that excellent introduction, we can begin on slide 3 of the presentation that just gives that recap back from the August meeting. Following the August meeting and the approval to use some former editions of the end of grade test as a special edition is what we're now calling this for fall 2020, we held a webinar on Monday, August 10th, and walked, of course, our colleagues across the state through what is available. And we emphasized some details that we felt had come through from the board discussion. One was to stress that the data was to provide a baseline measure of the previous year grade level content standards, and that the use of these special edition tests is not supportive of diagnostic purposes. We also clarified that it was totally a local decision whether some students or all students participate out of school, and also a local decision whether parents can opt out of participation. And then lastly, stressed that the administration protocols were being minimized where possible so that these administrations perhaps could be done in a way that was not conducive of a stressful environment, which is always so much the case with testing. So we responded to a lot of questions from the field, gave information so the local units could make their decision as to whether they would like to use these special edition tests. We're able to monitor the paper pencil orders, and I will share that as we had mentioned in August, we were getting indications that it would be minimal, and it has been minimal. As we go forward, of course, we'll continue to update the numbers for the online participation. But all that to say that when we first began to have this conversation, I do not think any of us thought that we would be in the situation we are now as school is beginning, and it is so very much remote across the state. But nevertheless, the availability of those assessments where it's locally determined that they are useful is there. So with that, and moving to the next slide, this is going back to a conversation that we had in June, particularly around our contract with NC State Technical Outreach for Public Schools, which is our partners for test development. And it began as a conversation with, in spring 2020, we had tests that were not administered, and so was that a cost savings to the state? What does that cost savings look like? So as we walk through these next several slides, we're going to consider, first of all, what is current work in any given school year? What is the new work that we're being tasked with, particularly around the Innovative Assessment Grant through the award through the U.S. Department of Education, and of course, responding to COVID. But it's very important to think about that testing is not something that happens in any one year. So even though we have assessments that have been built, we have to format those and get those ready to be administered in 2021 in the spring or throughout this year, depending if it's an end of course test, so that the data will flow appropriately. So it's not a matter of just taking the tests from 2019-20 and then just putting them in front of students. There is a lot of work that has to go into making that possible. We also have continuous work where we're always building field test items, and we're building forms to support NC check-ins, end of grade test, and of course test. The career technical education end of course test are delivered through the NC State contract. We develop items to populate SchoolNet. We also, you may be surprised to know, support textbook adoption work for the agency and the Capstone project as well. And this list goes on to the next slide, where we're really going to look at current development with the Innovative Assessment Demonstration Authority pilot. Now, this is very key to remember that this not only is granted by the U.S. Department of Education, and there was no funds attributed to this. This is continuing to depend upon the capacity that we have in the state of North Carolina. It's for 5 years for reading and mathematics, grades 3 through 8. And it's really utilizing the through grade model that we're so familiar with through NC check-in and tying that with a staged adaptive summative assessment that is better aligned to students' needs. Just want to pause here and emphasize as well that this is also in North Carolina state law, and what will be coming before you in the next meeting, I believe, is a report on where we are with the status of the development of this innovative assessment as required in North Carolina state law that we have to report to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee on November 15th of each year. So thinking about what does it mean to say that we're developing an innovative assessment and what work is required to do that. So on the next slide, we mentioned a few of these very key points that have to be attended in this development. We began the blueprint development in the spring of 2020, but that was for grades 4 and 7. And so we have to continue that model, and ultimately over the next 3 years, we'll have blueprint development for all of the grades for reading and math, grades 3 through 8. We have to develop items. We have to test those items in what we call cognitive labs, particularly for the technology enhanced items, which are very small settings with a few students just to have more information on how they interact with those items. Of course, our item development, we're trying to stretch as part of this innovative assessment work to go beyond multiple choice. And that is why it's so important to continue this item development work and to use cognitive labs to get student and teacher input on those items. The reporting structure, as we transition to another assessment, a new assessment, that assessment is going to be structured different. We hope that it's going to be reported out differently, not just online delivery of that, but asking the teachers and the users of the data, the education leaders across the state, what kind of data do you need from an assessment? And particularly with this through grade model, similar to NC check-ins, how can we make sure that we're giving that information throughout the year to support educational decisions? And then the professional development modules for teachers and school leaders, all of the groundwork that is being laid, particularly beginning with this year. And of course, the end year for the delivery of all this work is 2023-24. But the point here is that an assessment is not built in 1 year. An assessment takes time to build. And if you look on slide 8, this is actually state board policy that was implemented many years ago that laid out how much time it actually takes to develop an assessment. And the projection here is 44 to 49 months. Sometimes we don't have all of that time and we have to kind of work a little bit faster, but we can unequivocally say it is not a possible task to do all of this in 1 year. So that's why we're always working ahead. We're always not just focused on this year, but we're looking at what is coming down the road. And for North Carolina right now, that is this innovative assessment pilot that is supported by the General Assembly and by the U.S. Department of Education. And would also like to mention that in your materials, I believe, attached to this item, we have a letter from the Northwest superintendents who have shared their concern about the assessment system in North Carolina and their support of making sure that we are moving toward a new assessment system. To move toward that assessment system, we have to do the work currently. We have to do the work now. So that is in the attachments, and I will refer that to you for your consideration. Going back to the slides, of course, the next couple of slides, I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on. That is just to document all the work that has to go in, working, collaborating with NC State University, Technical Outreach for Public Schools, all of the details, if you will, the weeds of how we do this work. But I'd like to move on to slide 9, which also asks the question, what did we do in response to COVID-19? So COVID-19, we've already discussed initially this morning about the response to making available some previous editions of the end of grade test, a special edition test this fall for districts to use if they so wanted to. We've done some other things as well. We've developed an instrument called the Passport for Learning for classroom use, which is a grade level collection of items for review of the previous year's content. We've put together some item sets for math that are the domain level, again, intended for use. just like the NC check-ins, of which we also have added to the repertoire, reading at grade 3. And we also added constructive response items to the release tasks that already existed for grades 3 through 8 reading, and those are posted on our website. So we added some constructive response items, of course, because there is always interest in having open-ended items for students to respond to and support using those release tasks that are available on the website more fully. And we also have been thinking about remote learning. Started thinking about this very early on, but again, as I said before, I still must confess, I don't think I thought that we would be where we are. So I'm glad that we've made the steps we have done. We've moved some things to remote administrations that previously were not available. First and foremost, the NC check-ins. They're now available at home for students to have access to, and the teachers will have access to what they need to work with those students in remote learning environments to review those NC check-ins. We loaded the math sets that I previously mentioned and released items into SchoolNet, again, just to give more access to that. And here I would like to mention that we have worked with, or in process of working with, the North Carolina virtual charter schools. As you're aware, there's 2 virtual charter schools, and they have never participated in NC check-ins because they have to go to a brick and mortar location to administer the end of grade or the end of course test or the beginning of grade 3 test. And so they were unable to have access to NC check-ins because there was not a remote access availability. Very early on, early summer, we were contacted by one of the virtual charter schools, and we had conversations around, particularly in the situation that we're in, and we were going to remote access administrations to give them remote access as well. So we are working with them on that, and we're tackling not just providing them on district provided or virtual charter school provided devices, but also working through what it looks like for a parent to have to load this on a personal device. And the virtual charter schools are willing to work through that with us. So that's a good example of something that it's not the test sitting in the box. It's not the test on the online delivery platform, but it is work that has to occur to be able to work through to make that happen. And all of those are examples of things that we're working on to make sure that we are moving forward all the time, moving forward into the future. So the next slide really talks a little bit about the money. And the money is an important conversation because money, as we know, is an issue and will continue to be an issue. And as state servants, there's always an issue. We stress that very much in our division, that we are stewards of the state's money. We have to make good decisions in spending that money. So with that in mind, we're always very conservative with the TOPS task order that we have. And in typical years, we do have a reversion because the TOPS task order, which is part of what we're discussing this morning, is receipt-based. And so that means that money is only paid out if there is a receipt that is presented saying the money was spent. So it's either for positions or for receipt, such as paper or such as paying teachers. Our teachers across the state write many of the assessment items, and they review the items and they're paid for that work. And so that's what I mean when I say that it's receipted work. If that is not spent, then that money comes back. For the 2019-20 school year, that was $970,000. And I will share that that's a little bit high end, but nevertheless, we did have some savings. We're seeing it there. We also, in anticipation last year of knowing the status with the NC final exams, we used some attrition to actually, we've already reduced the contract going forward, which has been approved for this school year, 2020-21. It was approximately about $1 million less than it had been previously, because we, through attrition and realizing the scope of what was narrowing just a little bit, did that. So the contract cost for the 2020-21 school year and the next 2 school years is really needed to make sure that we're moving forward, that we're attending to the innovative assessment pilot, that we, as we've agreed to do with the U.S. Department of Education and as is in state law, that we continue to have the capacity to say, what can we do in this environment that we're currently in to support learning, particularly in remote environments, particularly in situations where things are not operating as they normally are. We feel as though that's a very important thing to consider. So with that, and the last thing I'd mentioned before stating the recommendation, of course, is once again the letter that we attached to this item that I think was also shared with you last week from the Northwest superintendents. I thought it was very supportive and interesting that amid COVID, because we know all of our colleagues across the state are really working very diligently, particularly right now, this minute, as schools are starting back up on so many aspects. And we're appreciative that the superintendents in the Northwest took the time to capture their thoughts and what we should be doing with testing, not necessarily for this year, but looking down the long view of what we need to be doing in testing for North Carolina for the long view. Our team is reviewing this letter, and we're going through it and identifying where we're aligned, where we need to give more thought, have more discussion to make sure that we're working toward a positive change for North Carolina. And then just also to mention that all of this work will always eventually get back to the purposes with Leandro. With Leandro, of course, we're all familiar, and the commitment there for a sound basic education for all students in North Carolina, working today, doing this work, supporting this work, having the capacity to do it to the best we can do, is how we're going to make sure in the future that we are where we want to go. So with that, our recommendation is to approve the NC State TOPS contract with the next 2 years, as well as what has already been approved this year, but to also approve it for the 2021-22 school year and the 2022-23 school year, with the assurance that, of course, as things change, the fiscal responsibility to the state of North Carolina will always be first and foremost in our priority in making sure that we make good decisions.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. And I think those contracts will be taken up tomorrow in our BizOp committee. Or is that in a later?
I think that is scheduled for October, Ms. Cameron.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Dr. Howard?
Ms. Kamnitz, I have a quick question of Dr. Howard. This is Olivia.
Go ahead, Olivia.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. I don't intend to put you on the spot at all, but I just have this yearning desire to ask this question about the innovative assessment pilots. What remains some of your questions about moving in this direction of measuring student achievement, or what students know at the end of the year or some period of time?
So thank you for that question, Dr. Oxendine. So where we are currently is we were supposed to be administering grade 4 mathematics and grade 7 reading through grade pilot this school year, but we were unable to field test the items in spring of 2020. So we were unable to do that, but we're now planning to do that in 2021-22 and doing additional grade levels. So it won't just be grade 4 and grade 7. We're adding content and adding grade levels because, of course, we have to get this trajectory going. I think the biggest question, and this is where we need to so very much continue our collaboration with our educator colleagues across the state, is how we can do this in a way that we really address some of the concerns that the Northwest superintendents addressed. The concern from the state is that the summative assessment at the end of the year is given when children are heading out the door, and that the data is not useful for immediate feedback to change instruction. And the concern also is that the testing program, the end of grade and the end of course test, particularly the end of grade, is very stressful for students. And that students are not necessarily always through multiple choice able to say what they know and they can do. And so with this pilot, we're working to address those two things as well as other things, but I think those are two very important things. With this three-grade approach, modeling after the NC check-ins, giving that feedback throughout the year, and then also doing that in such a way that perhaps we can mitigate some of the stress and also have other item type other than multiple choice, so that we're building an assessment that all of us can see the value in. We oftentimes in test development, we'll talk about the statistics, we'll talk about the reliabilities, we'll talk about the validity. We're very proud of that. North Carolina has excellent assessments that meet those criteria. This work is doing that, which we're already doing, but also doing it in a way that our partners across the state, the users of these tests, see it benefiting their need for outcomes, their need for helping children. That, I think, is where we need to go.
Okay, thank you for that, that answer. My related point is that are we collecting, do we have any way of knowing from our great NC check-in system, do we have any way of knowing the extent to which some of these traumatic emotions, fear, stress, anxiety, nervousness, are being mitigated because of the check-in model? That would help us on this path of innovation around assessments.
We will take that back. And of course, through this process, we're going to be having conversations with teachers and hopefully parents, if we can do that. And that will be some of the discussions that we will have in getting some of the feedback. We did hear from NC check-ins that the students were more familiar with the feedback, the format, and therefore had less anxiety and stress at the end of grade. But that was anecdotal. That was not a data collection, but we did hear that.
Any other questions from colleagues? If not, then let's move on to 3 items for action on first reading. The first one is SLA 1, Read to Achieve Local Alternative Assessments. Again, Dr. Howard.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Candace. So this is an annual item that the State Board approves every September, but we would like to give a little bit more context this year, and that is to stress that this list is not the same list that was approved by the board in August. So in August, the board approved 5 assessments that locals can use for diagnostic purposes for grades K through 3. This list originated in the very beginning of Read to Achieve, when it was determined in the law that locals can have access to a local benchmark assessment to see if students meet Read to Achieve through these measures. And in the law, it specifies that the State Board of Education has the responsibility to compile this list and say which assessments are on this list. So this list is another way that students can meet the Read to Achieve standard. And so every September, we bring forth this list, and the criteria for this list is these assessments must have a Lexile linking study. We collect those linking studies from the vendors, keep them on file, so we can affirm, as you see in this far right column, the Lexile level, what it is for each one of the assessments. Students, at their local discretion, can have access to these assessments, and if they meet this standard in the far right column, then they have met the Read to Achieve standard. Typically, how assessments get added to this list is the process is that a school district must contact us and ask for a vendor to be considered. And this year, we do have some new assessments that have been added, and you can see those on the executive summary, but I'll read those very quickly. Imagine Learning is being added. Fast Bridge is pending being added until their Lincoln study is completed, but we anticipate that happening, and we'll actually come back with a technical addition if that happens. Imagination Station, and then Amplify M-Class Text Reading and Comprehension. And Case 21 assessments was approved in 2019-20, but now it has a new name of Certica Solutions. So this list is presented to the board for approval for an additional way that students in third grade may meet the Read to Achieve standard.
And again, this is optional for districts, Dr. Howard, is that correct? The use of these?
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
All right, any questions on SLA1? If not, we'll move on to SLA2, the cohort graduation rate for the 2019-2020 school year.
Okay, thank you again. So for the 2019-20 school year, though we do not have accountability data, we do have the cohort graduation rate. And of course, that is because even though the tests were waived, students did graduate. So just to remind us all, the rules for calculating the cohort graduation rate meets the requirements of the federal Every Student Succeeds Act. The cohort graduation rate is defined as a percentage of students in the adjusted cohort who graduate within 4 years with a regular high school diploma. So for the 2019-20 cohort, these were students who entered the ninth grade for the first time in the 2016-17 school year. The cohort is adjusted, meaning a school can remove students who transfer after the ninth grade under certain circumstances, and they can subtract out any students that transferred out, migrated to another country, transferred to a prison or juvenile facility, or are deceased. So annually at this time, we present this cohort graduation rate, and for the 2019-20 school year, the cohort graduation rate is 87.6 for all students, and that is a 1.1 percentage increase of the 2018-19 cohort graduation rate, which was 86.5. And if we look in this chart, we'll see this information is disaggregated for all of our subgroups, and all of the results are available on our website, and one can go and look at it for each district and each school. But if you look at this chart, table 1, you'll see that really every group went up compared to 2018-19, except for the white subgroup was at 80. I think the white subgroup is the only one that went down, but let me double check. Yes, that's right. They were, actually they went up too, I apologize. Everyone went up, with English learners and academically gifted remaining the same. So this is great news for all of those at the statewide level, and then of course all of the disaggregated subgroups. Table 3 shows the 5-year cohort graduation rate, and just to qualify, the 5-year, of course, is where it's not related to this year's 4, it's actually the 2018-19 4, giving those students an additional year to graduate. And so you can see the 5-year for all students in North Carolina is 88%. So with that, we're open to any questions or comments.
Any questions for Dr. Howard on the graduation rate? Hearing none, let's move on to SLA 3, English 2 standard setting update. Dr. Howard again.
Okay, thank you so very much. So there is a PowerPoint to go with this as well. And the beginning of this PowerPoint just reminds us that the State Board of Education adopted new English language arts content standards in 2017. New assessments were implemented in 2019-20 school year. Now, of course, we know we did not have our spring assessments administered in spring of 2020 for end of grade reading, but we were able to administer the fall English 2 assessments. And there was enough data from the fall English 2 assessments to proceed with standard setting, which is always required whenever we have a new assessment. It's the setting of the scores that students are indicated as being not proficient, level 3, level 4, or level 5. So with that work before us, just to share briefly on slide 3, we have a plan for doing the standard setting. We review that with our North Carolina technical advisors. We contracted with Data Recognition Corporation, who is an external vendor. And that's an important point because we at the department, we do not facilitate these discussions. We actually contract that, so that is a more objective process. And we also retained Dr. Gregory Seisig, who is with the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, to serve as an external evaluator. And Dr. Seisig is really considered one of the leading world experts in this process of setting standards on state assessment or on assessments in general. Most importantly, the last bullet is we recruited teacher educators from across North Carolina to participate in the workshops that were held virtually August 4th through 6th. Without the teachers, this work could not be possible. And they, of course, are the ones that are on the ground level, working with the content standards with students in North Carolina schools. So if we go to the next slide, you can see here the demographics for those participating teachers. Of course, we try very hard to have those demographics reflect the state population. Sometimes that is not always possible. For example, the most glaring one you'll notice is the difference between the male and female populations. So we're always appreciative of our male participants. The next slide is really a reminder. This is, again, the standards that we're setting, the non-proficient, the level 3, the level 4, and the level 5. These levels were actually adopted by the state board in 2019 when the mathematics standard setting was approved. And once those are done for an initial assessment, as with math, then those will apply going forward until we have an overhaul of all the content standards for the different content areas. So these policy descriptors, this is the very high level, these actually are not up for adoption today. These have already been adopted. The next few slides, particularly the next one, talks about the processes and the actual work. And just would like to just highlight here that we have some documents that are attached that you may want to refer to. We have the report from Data Recognition Corporation that gives a very thorough explanation of the process that the teachers went through to do these outcomes that are now being presented to you for your approval. Also attached is the evaluated report from Dr. Seisig that will also give you an overview of the process. The next slide, this is what is part of being adopted today. Now, it's much more extensive than what we're seeing here. This is one example of one content standard, but this is called the academic achievement level descriptors. And this is really, as practitioners, what we would like to see the focus on, because this tells for these students that reach these scores, their performance in terms of the content standard. So these are drafted by the teachers through a workshop to do this prior to doing the actual standard setting. So with that, stressing that the process is documented and is attached. If we could go to slide 9 and just stress that what is being presented today is this final step, which is for the State Board of Education to adopt both the achievement level descriptors and the scale scores for each academic achievement level. It's important to remember, if you look on the next slide, that these recommendations are based on what students can do based on their performance on the English 2 reading assessment aligned to the State Board of Education adopted content standards. And we do survey the teachers, participants, educators throughout the process. And in those surveys, the ones who participated indicated their confidence in both the process and the recommended. That brings us to slide 11, which will show you the actual recommendation with respect to the scale score cut for each achievement level. The orange bar is what is being recommended, and you'll see that says fall 2019. The green bar has the data from 2018-19. So if we look, for example, at not proficient, we can see the recommendation. If the scale score cut is applied, then based on the fall 2019 data, 42% of the students would be not proficient. This is pretty consistent with the 44% from fall of 2018 based on the previous assessment that were level 2 and below. And as you look across, you'll see there's that same consistency with level 5. In 2018, we had 5% at level 5, and based on this recommendation, we would have 6% for level 5 for fall 2019. The difference that we see is level 3 and level 4. And I'm sure all of us remember that the level 3 designation on the previous test edition was an outcome of a statistical error. It was not part of the standards. And so what that did with the previous assessment is the level 4, of course, you're seeing here on the green, ranged from 42, 44, 45, and the level 3 was 9%. What this standard setting has done is it has gone through the appropriate process, the research-based method to have a standard set for level 3 that is technically sound and defensible. And so that is why we're seeing this shift of students from level 4 to level 3. And then level 4, of course, now is at 29%. So in conclusion, the last slide, we did pull a quote from Dr. Cizik, who again was the external evaluator, who was a silent observer of the process. And his statement that he has in his report is the participants' cut score recommendations can be considered to be valid and reliable estimates of the cut scores for the relevant assessment. Policymakers can have confidence that the recommendations are based on sound procedures, producing credible, defensible, and educationally useful results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Howard. I'm sure it was a pleasure to have some element of testing from last year that you could still move ahead with.
Absolutely.
These English 1 scores. Any questions for Dr. Howard about this item?
Ms. Kamnitz, it's JB.
Go ahead, JB.
Thank you. Dr. Howard, I'm just want to make sure I understand the practical impact of the cut scores in the area you highlighted for us, which was levels 3 and 4. And if we think of levels 4 and 5 as college and career ready, and level 3 as at or above grade level, then what do you think this shift from 9% to close to a quarter of our students being just at that level 3 rather than the college and career ready level means for schools and districts?
Yeah, I think, the purpose of the data is to know what students need, to know how they're performing and what they need based on that. So the level 3, through the standard setting, what it does is it is identifying students who are right at that 3 and may still need additional support. And when one goes and reads the achievement level descriptors, then that comes through. So I think it's important to identify more precisely the level 3 students as compared to the level 4, because as you said, Mr. Buxton, level 4 is college and career ready. So a level 3 isn't quite there. So if I were a practitioner in a school, I would look at my level 3 students and think, what do I need to do to get them to a level 4? And then the other thing to remember is this lines up with the outcomes that we see on ACT. So that's an external assessment, if you will. And it shows similar performance to what we're seeing in these recommended cuts. And then the last comment, of course, is that the teachers who were involved in this process, the process is not about the number. So, I think, over the years, people sometimes think we go in a back room and we just, say, well, we only want so many at this level or so many at that level. But it really comes back to the teacher's input of, here's what is expected of a level 3 student. Here are the content standards. Okay. Here are the items, the test. And which one of these items that we have developed to measure those content standards you know, of our students, at what point would a student not be able to get an item correct? So I hope that addressed what you were asking.
Absolutely. I appreciate that answer, Ms. Camden. Just a quick follow-up comment.
Yes.
That, I think in a lot of ways, this is a really important change because it more provides a more granular identification of students that we need to continue to support to move to college and career ready so they enter into those credit bearing courses. And I think this is a helpful adjustment. So I thank Dr. Howard for her leadership, and I think this is something that provides a little bit more granular data for the Principal Smiths of the world and the Principal Wallaces to focus in their efforts. I know they probably don't need any more help. They're principals of the year for a reason, but to our principals across the state, it does give us a little bit more specificity of students who still need that push and support. Thanks.
Are there any other questions or comments from anyone?
This is Mr. Ford, really briefly.
Yes, go ahead.
And I may be opening up a can of worms here, and so forgive me. But whereas I do think the granularity does assist and it does provide more nuance. I go back and I look at some of the commentary in the WestEd report, and the idea of collapsing back down to 4 sort of levels versus 5, and that being more in alignment. Just kind of what are our thoughts on that? Where are we landing on that, Dr. Howard?
So with respect to the shift from 5 to 4, we had that conversation last year, of course. And the key thing to remember about that is I think we are still maintaining expectation of college and career readiness. And the 5 levels were just that. They were 5 levels. And I think it was thought, my recollection was that 4 would be a little bit more clearly communicated. And so that was what was recommended to do and adopted by the board. So I think regardless of if it's 5 or if it's 4, the federal requirement is that we must have 3. The key part is that we use that information, I think, to go back to what Mr. Buxton said, to look at students who are not at that college and career ready level. That even if there are 3 and they're not proficient, most clearly that our focus should be on moving students forward. Data is data, and whether it's 5 or whether it's 4 or whether it's 3, it's what we do with it that is going to make the difference for the students in the state.
Ms. Camden, one more point if I could.
Thank you. Okay.
Just, I think Mr. Ford raised a good point, and just a reminder from our discussion before, my recollection is that when the department made the decision to reduce the number of items on the test, we did lose some ability to make meaningful distinctions between levels 1 and 2. So even if we wanted to go back to a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it would be difficult. And Dr. Howard, please correct me if this is wrong, but my recollection is it would be difficult to have those meaningful distinctions between 1 and 2. And so it's kind of incumbent upon us to report them together.
Well, I apologize for not remembering that, and you are absolutely correct. And Maxie Moore, who is our section chief for test development, who is listening, texted me as well to remind me of that detail. So thank you to her and to you for remembering that, and that is exactly what happened. So thank you both.
Any further questions before we give Dr. Howard a break?
Ms. Kemp, I have a quick question of Dr. Howard.
Okay.
Thank you. We're talking, spending some time talking about the student at the within the category of 3. Dr. Howard, if I'm the classroom teacher, will I be given some reports so that I can know over time if 3 of my students have been 3s for 3 years consecutively? In other words, what type of reporting does a teacher receive to guide instruction?
Right. So absolutely, teachers receive information on the students. That information is available for them to look at. And I'm very confident that our local educators are looking at in this case, the previous test scores, and then previous to that they're looking at those trends over time. Students, of course, get an individual student report that goes home for their parents to see how they did, but also the teachers and the principals and the other educators absolutely have access to this data over time and can look. And again, we spend a lot of time talking about the achievement level descriptors and encouraging not to just look at the number, but to go look and see. And this is in board policy. Once this is approved, if you go look at the board policy, you'll be able to see, and it's in your attachment today, all of those descriptors for the different achievement levels. And that is very important for them to have access to, and they absolutely do.
Well, it's another tool toward equity also, so that the teacher knows how to organize instruction around meaningful sub-reports, I suppose. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for those really good questions. We will move on to our only action item, which is SLA 4, report to the General Assembly, implementation of remote instruction plans. I believe Dr. Wren and Ms. Shaw Coltrane are going to present this report to us today, which will help us understand how districts have developed the instructional methods that at the moment are the new normal for many of our students and teachers. So Dr. Wren and Ms. Shaw Coltrane.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. This is Sneha. Thank you so much for having us. And Dr. Wren and I will be presenting SLA 4, the remote instruction plans, which actually is a requirement from Session Law 2023 based in the school calendar bill. And so as you can see, what we have done in the report is provide you a background as well as critical components that were required for to meet the requirements of the law. We have many things online which have the website addresses here, because if we were to have included things into the actual report itself, your report would be thousands and thousands upon pages. So we did get permission to put in links, which is unusual, and we're very grateful to the General Assembly for working with us on that. So as we shared last month, the remote instruction plans did come into the department on July 20th, and that they were required by all public school units, which include our local education agencies, our charter schools, as well as regional and lab schools as well. This report does have a copy of each remote instruction plan that was submitted, and that again, we have that in the links for you. Data on various specific components, as well as the strengths, challenges, and trends that we are seeing, and that we did a survey with our PSUs on to help us gain a better understanding of what was happening in the field. We have also listed for you on page 3 and 4 all of the required components of the remote instruction plans. As you can see, they were the framework that they had to speak to really had to do with the instructional components, as Ms. Campbell, you have mentioned, and also the communication and the involvement of the community, families, and teachers in this process. They were initially meant to have 13 components, and the board, if you recall, back in June, you all did add 2 additional components regarding some more special populations, as well as describing limitations to help inform all of our work together as we support North Carolina schools. These reports were initially designed and intended for the 5 emergency remote days that were built into the calendar law. However, as Dr. Howard mentioned, and then all of us know that we continue with the pandemic, and they now have the ability and the flexibility to increase their remote learning days as needed. And as we know, we have many districts in Plan C and all districts in Plan C or Plan B, which of course involves some type of remote learning. We do want to remind all of our listeners and our board members that these plans are not the full plans of Plan B or Plan C as DHHS require, which involve health and safety and transportation, logistical things. These plans are about the instructional habits and the instructional strategies that will be provided through a remote setting through this year. We have received, and we are very pleased to say that as of August 18th, 100% of the state's 325 public school units have submitted remote instruction plans, and we are just so incredibly pleased with that number. It was a state-wide effort, an agency-wide effort in partnership with Office of Charter Schools, with the UNC system, with our lab schools, with so many different people to ensure that communication was clear and the support that we gave to our PSUs to help them develop this framework. So in one of, we did review the remote instruction plans, and a very big thank you to Dr. Wren's team. They really spent a significant amount of time reviewing these plans. And while there were definitely a range in the responses, we feel very confident, and it's very evident that the intent is clear to provide a quality framework for effective student learning on remote instruction days. We are using these plans to continue to guide our support for remote instruction. Of course, as they develop them, we provided a very in-depth guide, as well as significant number of technical assistance sessions, as well as webinars, really focused on each of the 15 components. And now we are continuing as remote instruction is, like Ms. Camden said, part of our new normal, to really continue to support our PSUs with remote instruction. We're using their plans to help guide and inform how we coach within the regional structure, as well as in the program areas. For example, my team at AIG read all of number 14s of the plans recently, and we're using that information to help on a webinar actually next week. We continue to work on providing significant professional learning opportunities across the agency regarding remote learning. We are building capacity through a special initiative, a coaching cohort initiative with the Friday Institute, where we're helping leaders in districts and PSUs build their capacity so then they can coach locally. We're working with our regional case managers and staff to continue the coaching as well. And we have several examples here if you want to click on them at a later date to see all of the resources that are being provided to help North Carolina public schools, our teachers, our families, as we move through this very, very unique new normal. And of course, we're continuing to update our guidebook. So now to the report components. The first one, again, like I discussed, we have thousands of pages, so we have gotten permission with 2 websites here. We did also package these by state board region for your ease. So that way you can click on the second link and go straight to your state board region if you wanted to read your plans, but also every single PSU's plan is listed there. Number 2 and 3, we had to kind of provide an overall look at what resources were used in our PSUs. So we did get a spreadsheet listing gathered by each PSU based on their online and offline resources that they're using. And we were asked to report if any of the PSUs were only using offline resources. And we will say that 100% did submit online resources, and that there were no PSUs that indicated they were using only offline resources. So if you are interested, you can click there, and the General Assembly members can click on that link under number 2 and 3 to show the types of resources that are being used. We will say after reading all of them that we can report to the board that all of the PSUs did address all of the 13 components required, as well as the 2 additional items that you required. Again, the range of the level of comprehensiveness is definitely there. There is a wide range. However, their intent is clear, and we continue to work with those who need more support. We then did what I think is going to be the most important part of this report, are the strengths and challenges and trends. And we did do a survey in August to gain a feel for what our PSUs were thinking regarding the strengths and limitations and trends. And so Dr. Wren is going to walk us through that. Vanessa?
Thank you so much, Sneha. Again, one of the required areas of our report was to report out on the strengths, challenges, and I found very exciting is the trends that we're seeing across the state. We had 8 common areas of strengths that PSUs have reported. And the first one is professional development and teacher readiness. PSUs reported that a significant amount of time since March of 2020 was conducted to prepare teachers for pedagogical shifts to support remote learning. We also learned that the professional learning focused around digital teaching and learning tools and social and emotional well-being strategies to support our new normal of remote learning. Another strength that was reported was alignment, and this is alignment in various areas. Alignment in curriculum and instruction, community involvement, communication, processes, online tools, learning platforms, and just an overall sense of everyone is on the same page is one of the strengths we heard repeatedly from our PSUs. Another strength was the teachers and staff. PSUs reported an incredible dedication, support, and flexibility of their staff as they prepared to meet the needs of all of their students and families during this remote learning period. And similar to that is community and families. PSUs reported that the support and understanding from families and communities in response to the changes and the challenges schools were adapting to was exceptional during this time. So a lot of collaboration and understanding. Another strength, and we've heard this several times today, is in devices. PSUs reported an increased access to devices for students and staff, and that they've been able to move or working to move to all one-to-one. Digital content and learning management systems is another reported strength. PSUs reported that they have standardized their learning management systems and digital content by using both locally created and purchased content with these platforms. Funding was another strength. We had an outpouring of reports that PSUs were very appreciative of the additional funding to increase access to mobile connectivity and devices and other related items. And the support and feedback that they've received from many places. They've reported this much appreciation for the support, feedback, and communication between NCDPI, PSUs, administrators and teachers, and families and students. We've included here several excerpts from the survey. where I think it's very important to hear from the voice of our educators in the field who are actually on the front lines implementing remote learning. And they've put in their own words some of the strengths that they've experienced. And so we've captured some of those there for you to review. The next area is our challenges. Again, we had very common themes around our challenges, and they centered around 5 common themes. The number 1 challenge reported by PSUs is internet access. PSUs reported that reaching families in remote areas with limited or no internet access was one of their biggest challenges, which was leading them to provide pencil and paper packets and the additional complication of the transportation and delivery of those offline resources as a significant challenge for them. And just as professional development and teacher readiness was a strength, it was also reported as a challenge. PSUs reported that they continue to develop the expertise of their teachers in providing equity during remote learning, especially with their EC and EL populations, and becoming more digitally competent as they move to teach in blended and online environments. Another challenge is the lack of devices. PSUs were immediately concerned that there are many orders that they've put in for devices, and because of the global supply shortage, getting those orders in a timely manner to make sure that every student has a school-provided device for them was a significant challenge. Our PSUs reported that additional funding is still needed to continue ensuring that every student has a device and they have funding for internet subscriptions and curriculum resources. Another challenge that was reported is supporting families. PSUs have reported that they have families who are balancing supporting their children at home while they are teleworking, understanding online tools, understanding devices, and the child care situation is an ongoing challenge for the communities. And again, just like we did for strengths, we included several excerpts on the challenges from the field of what they are experiencing as they have moved to Plan Bs and Plan Cs, and they are supporting remote instruction. But I think one of the most important and helpful components of this report is the statewide trends. And we actually went through every survey and quantified all the responses on trends so we could somewhat do a ranking of what we're seeing in trends. And number 1 is much use of asynchronous and synchronous instruction. We're seeing various ways that synchronous and asynchronous instruction are being used. Many schools have implemented schedules that simulate a modified physical school schedule, while other schools are using different ways of asynchronous learning. We've also seen a trend with connectivity. Of course, this ongoing struggle for broadband connectivity is very prevalent and is an ongoing limitation, especially for our students who live in areas without cellular availability. We've seen an immediate expanded usage of mobile Wi-Fi hotspots where cellular coverage is available. And again, non-connected households being served with pencil and paper packets and telephone communication. Another area that we saw as a state trend was some very creative solutions using existing resources. One of the things that we saw was PSUs are developing fully virtual learning programs or academies as a choice for their families, and families are choosing those at a much higher rate than in previous years. PSUs also reported that they repurposed stationary computing equipment to distribute those to students and staff, and that they used existing building network infrastructure to distribute Wi-Fi expanded connectivity in their parking lots and common areas. Another area where we saw a trend is in digital resources and platforms. We've seen a significant increase in one-to-one computing environments, and the primary tool that we're seeing used with those are Chromebooks. We also noted that PSUs who were already a one-to-one had an advantage. They were immediately able to shift to professional learning and family support and not have the burden of putting the infrastructure in place that other schools had. We've also seen an increased use of consistent learning management systems and digital content. And schools have also noted with that the need for their staff to be skilled in digital learning competencies and standards for students. And again, as we mentioned as a challenge, we have this ongoing trend of decreased global supply of devices that has impacted how quickly our schools can receive orders that they have put in. And some of them put orders in June and are just beginning to receive those. And orders in July, they are anticipating receiving those as late as December and perhaps January. And again, PSUs have lifted up the need for high quality, standards aligned digital content. Another trend that we saw was community involvement. PSUs said that they are seeing communities very involved in this process and that they've been able to provide flexibility for families with various work and home situations and an increased amount of communication between the school and the community. We also saw a trend of remote instruction plan development, where PSUs have said to us that they want to continue to refine their plans as districts are more skilled and experienced in providing remote instruction, being able to adapt their initial plans before they were in the operating in this mode. And two other trends that we saw are, again, around professional development. One of the things that came up was needing more time and continuing to make sure their teachers were skilled in remote instruction and the tools and devices used to carry out remote instruction. And lastly, a heightened concern about meeting the needs of certain populations, specifically the needs of our K-2 learners who are emerging readers and our EL, EC, and low performing students. So one of the last things that we were asked to report on was any other data that we felt would be useful to report on. And again, we saw that our PSUs were in the beginning stages of operationalizing the remote instruction plans, and that they all will be making adjustments as they see what's happening with their students, their families, and feedback from their teachers. And overall, PSU shared that the components required in the remote instruction plan help them to plan and communicate and deliver effective instruction. And lastly, we want to make sure that we point out that we will continue to provide professional development opportunities, technical assistance, coaching, and sharing of some of the ideas and best practices that we are seeing across the state. And I know my colleague Sneha touched on some of the support that we were already doing and that we will continue to do with that. And that concludes our report. And we would be glad to accept any questions.
That was truly an informative report. Thank you so much. Questions from my colleagues?
This is Amy White. I don't have a question. I just have a comment on one thing that I would love to have included. And while I realize it's not within our control, on page 8 we talk about the impact on what remote learning has meant to families, and I just wanted to give a very practical example with some fiscal figures. Every parent in the state of North Carolina does not have the luxury to work from home. And when parents can't work from home and children are learning remotely, there must be a viable childcare option. Many community partners have come together to provide that. Most of them are offered for a cost. So I wanted to include just some figures. So if you were a family who must work outside of the home and you had children in the home and you hired a child care babysitter for $7.25 an hour, and For $7.25 an hour times roughly 7 hours a day, that's $50 a day in unexpected childcare expenses. Now multiply that times 5 days a week. And then multiply that for a total of 18 weeks. So the 50.75 times 5 is $253 a week. And for 2 9-week sessions of school, that's 18 total weeks. That's a total of $4,567.15 for unexpected childcare costs for families who must work outside of the home to meet the everyday demands of living expenses. For an entire year, that's $9,135. Let's just say that you find a program that you could send your child to, and that program at a minimum cost $150 a child. That total for a week would be $2,700, but you don't have one child, you have 2 children. That's $5,400 for 9 weeks of childcare. So the financial impact is not being told, and that in this particular document, that's no fault of yours because you were asked to report on items within your control with the remote instruction plans, but the impact and the fiscal impact on families who barely make ends meet in our state will come out in student achievement because parents may be forced with leaving children at home unsupervised, and that gives my heart giant pause.
Thank you, Ms. White, for that very powerful reality check. Any other follow-up to this report? Hearing none, thank you again to Ms. Shaw Coltrane and Dr. Wren for putting together such a really useful document. Let's see, now if we could move on to our discussion items. SLA 5 is Alternative Schools Accountability Model Options for 2021. In the interest of time, I'm thinking that perhaps we could just quickly explain what this item is, and then we will be seeing it again next month. And perhaps if there is follow-up, we can deal with it then. Is that acceptable, Chair Davis? Or whoever I need to ask.
Yes, that's fine.
Our alternative schools have a choice of 3 different accountability models, and only one of those models requires our approval. And this list is those models asking for our approval. So there's a list of schools and the methods that they're using. Dr. Howard, did I leave anything important out just briefly there?
Just briefly, that there are approximately 16 schools that have not submitted theirs, but we anticipate them being submitted prior to the October meeting and being added to this list. And that is due to difficulties with local state boards amid COVID. That is the only thing I would add.
Great. So next month we will have a more complete report before we take action on it.
Yes.
Thank you so much. SLA 6 is the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee report, Career and College Ready Graduate Program. This program is a joint program between our high schools and the North Carolina Community College System, and Dr. Mullinex and Ms. Shaw Coltrane are going to present this to us.
And this won't take too long, Ms. Kamnitz. We just want to give a quick update on this program that we have been planning for a few years now. We are pleased to report that between our work with the State Board of Community Colleges and the Community College System Office, that we will be able to begin implementation of CCRG in January of 2021 with the next semester of courses. As a reminder, in case some of you are not familiar with this program is an opportunity for eligible high school students to align with the RISE program of the community college system and to ensure remediation-free placement in math and reading in the community colleges. And so this great opportunity will allow students to involve themselves with the NROC platform, which is the adopted model of the community college system, earlier than when they go to the community college in high school. And we will be able to start that this upcoming January. Schools have expressed, a concern of the statewide implementation of CCRG during COVID-19. However, both of our agencies are committed to supporting the implementation and working with the school districts to support student success even during the pandemic. Angie is now going to quickly talk to you about professional development and the procurement of the NROC platform. Angie?
Everyone. So we had originally planned for some professional development to be conducted in the spring of 2020. And as you might recall, we were still in the procurement process. And so we were unable to provide that professional development at that time. And I'll cover the procurement in just a moment. But in terms of professional development, we are working with the community college system to stand up some virtual PD sessions in October of this year so that our LEAs can have that PD prior to implementation in January of 2021. We will advertise that through various communication means, so we make sure that all of the LEAs have the information beforehand and can prepare for those sessions. In addition, we're also working with the community college system on standing up some dates in the spring of 2021 to provide ongoing professional development, as we anticipate that once teachers get into the platform and begin working with it, of course, they will have some questions. So the community college system wants to make sure that they provide that ongoing support to them. In terms of procurement, we are very pleased to report that procurement has been finalized and payment was provided to the NROC platform for their services. I do want to note that payment was made via lapsed salaries for this first year of implementation, and the payment of $469,000 has been rendered. But I do also want to point out that though we used flat salaries this year, that is not going to be a reality for us as we move forward into the next years. So securing funding for this initiative will be very, very key in ensuring that we don't have any sort of gaps in our support for LEAs with this platform. I believe that wraps up procurement and PD. Sneha?
Yeah, so if you are interested, we also have below the line in the report kind of the eligibility requirements that have been set by the community college, as well as specifics around the implementation of the math content and the English content. But this is our report, and it will be coming back to you. Actually, and excuse me, I have the wrong date that it's due. It's actually due October 15th, which is why it's on discussion, and next month you will vote on it for action.
Thank you both.
So the same report is also going to the State Board of Community Colleges.
Thank you. Questions on this? We will see it again next month.
Ms. Camus, this is Alan Duncan. Could I ask a question on this?
Absolutely.
I'm concerned about the funding situation. How much was spent last year for this program from lapsed salaries?
Yes, sir. We used $469,000 from Standards Curriculum and Instruction to fund this. And this is the first year. This year of implementation is the first year of its funding. The procurement process took quite a long time because the vendor had some IT and security issues that they had to work out, but we have only made one payment of $469,000. So that is just one time that we have used those lapsed salaries. Again, though, we don't see that as being something we can maintain in years moving forward.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall that lap salary purchase going through the BizOp committee process. Am I wrong about that?
I will need to go back and double check with Deanna and Tamika, but I believe that I recall us discussing the amount several times in the spring, but from that point, it's a little fuzzy as to whether or not what we did with BizUp. So I would have to go back through and look so that I don't have that conveyed incorrectly to you, sir.
Since, as you say, the lap salaries is not sustainable going forward to support this, what is the plan for long-term sustainability of this very worthy program?
So we've requested for the General Assembly to fund this program. And because of the budget not being passed for that is why we had to go ahead and use the lap salaries. The ideal situation would be that General Assembly would fund this program moving forward based on the legislation.
And Mr. Duncan, if you'll recall, and just to let the board know, for the last 3 years, we've actually, or at least 3 years, that has been one of your asks to the General Assembly, is for funding of the platform as well as an additional staff member. Last year, the General Assembly did fund the community college system, money for staff and the professional development, but has not yet funded the department for this platform.
Is it in our ask for this year?
My understanding is yes.
All right. Well, let's make sure we all confirm that and follow up on that ask, because the importance of bringing funding behind, as we said, this very valuable and important program and a sustaining basis is extremely important.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan, for raising that up.
Thank y'all.
Any other questions before we move on to SLA 7?
Ms. Kamnes, this is Matt Bristow-Smith. I have a quick one. So Dr. Molnix or Dr. Shaw Coltrane, as I recall last spring, we had a number of schools in North Carolina that were piloting CCRG. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember how many schools were doing those pilots. But can you remind us or refresh us how many schools are piloting? And then when we entered the period of school closure in mid-March last year, did those schools continue their pilots remotely? And if so, did they complete a full pilot process? And were we able to learn some lessons from those pilots that we can apply moving forward in our implementation in January? Thank you.
So the pilots actually last year were fewer than 2 years ago, actually. And we'll have to get the exact numbers from the community college system. We don't have those right in front of us. But we will be happy to get that for you. The community college has been looking at the program. I do know that they were hoping to go statewide this fall with RISE. However, there's been a little bit of delay there among some of the colleges, and so they will be hopefully moving statewide with the platform next year. That is their intent. However, I do think they continue to look at the success of the program. But we'll be happy to get that information to you.
Perhaps it could be included when we come back to this topic next month.
Sure, happy to do that.
Thank you.
All right. Again, for discussion, SLA 7, report to the General Assembly, school performance, annual report cards for schools, and school building report, accountability measures for 1st through 3rd grade students. I think Chair Davis referred at the beginning of our meeting to the fact that we don't have, this is the month we would usually be getting all this information, and we have very limited information at this point, but Dr. Galloway is going to share with us what we do have.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity to share the state level summary report. As you are all aware, with COVID-19, the reporting requirements outlined in Read to Achieve General Statute for the accountability measures changed abruptly in March. Session Law 2023, Senate Bill 704 outlined the reporting requirements for the 2019-2020 school year. Section 2.7 of the Senate Bill 704 includes the requirements for districts to report the number and percentage of first, second, and third grade students on track and not on track to meet year-end expectations based on the assessments complete on or before March 13th, and the number and percentage of third grade students retained for reading deficiencies. Charters report those data for only third grade. Districts and charters were provided guidance for reporting in June with the expectation to report by July 31st. There was a week-long window of opportunity to verify and validate the data reported, and the data reported are on the following tables. For first and second grade, they are shared in the tables. So first grade data indicates 60.3% were on track and 39% were not on track as of March 13th. For second grade, 72% were on track and 28% were not on track as of March 13th. And third grade data shows 69.5% of third grade students were on track and 30.5% were not on track, with less than 5% retained for reading deficiencies. So some of the limitations within the reporting include that the data set was pre-populated with MOY ISIP EO data for the overall score and did not include the comprehension subtest or other data that were available at the school and district level. There were also multiple other changes in the requirements that were given to districts that could have resulted in potential unintended errors in the reporting. This could be resolved, resulting in closer alignment with historical data if given additional time to provide more support and more guidance to the districts and charters with the reporting. With the timeline of the report being due to the JLEOC by October 15th, we would like for our next steps to be to provide additional guidance and specific strategic support to the districts and charters with the missing or limiting information, and open the reporting for a chance for districts and charters to respond within a specific short timeline. This would give us the opportunity to validate or correct any concerns and compile the results and bring the report back to the board in October. So at this time, I'm open to any questions or discussion.
Questions? Thank you, Dr. Galloway. Hearing none, let's move on to our, briefly to our two consent items.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. SLA 8 is report to the JLEOC on the comprehensive reading plan. I would like to say that our board has been carefully following the development of this plan, and I think we're all well aware of the statewide effort that produced it and the huge impact it will have on early literacy in North Carolina. Just as the newly appointed chair of this committee, I would like to ask Mr. Buxton, the former chair who led this work, to say a few words about it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. And given the hour, I'll be brief. First, I want to thank the department for its work on this and the board for its leadership on this. I think as much as we are all concerned about where COVID has placed a lot of our students for whom our early literacy agenda has been focused on supporting, I think I would also be of one mind with my fellow board members that we are excited about what our reading effort and priority has developed. I think this is a strong report which really embodies the alignment we have across key partners and actors on the early literacy front. I think we've got a point of view in this report about what we think effective reading instruction looks like, how important high quality instructional materials are, the role of teacher preparation, the role of support in the classroom. The list goes on, and I know is reflected on our 9 priorities in our framework for action. But I feel good about what we stand on the brink of being able to achieve as a state. And so I'm thankful for this board's continuing focus on this as a priority and this department's continuing focus on this as a priority. And I think the report is a good reflection of that. Ms. Kamnitz, thank you for giving me the opportunity to say something and to express my optimism about where we go from here.
Nine is appointment recommendations to the Council for Exceptional Children. We saw these recommendations last month. There are 2 vacancies are being filled, both by parents of children with disabilities, Ms. Shanna Steiner and Ms. Joanna Caratelli. That concludes the SLA committee report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. And I just add one additional comment to SLA 6, the Career and College Ready Graduate Program. That is an incredibly important program, and I want to express my appreciation to the hard work that the department has put into that partnership with the community college program. The superintendent gave a great report on this item in the My Future NC board meeting earlier this week, which shows the importance of this program towards our state's goal of accomplishing the goals of My Future NC. So my thanks to the department. We'll now break and return at 1:30. 1:30.
Thank you.